That's the economic system that brings wealth if it's based upon hard money, real money, or currency that's redeemable in gold and silver coin with honest money. And additionally, those manufacturers are protected by protective tariffs so that they're not going to be wrecked by slave labor coming in from overseas, slave labor-produced goods coming in from overseas.
Which is happening now.
Which is happening now.
Right.
Everything that has worked in the past has been totally disbanded now. We have a central bank that's never been audited. It's never never filed a tax return. Its profits are totally unknown. We have no gold and silver coin. All we have is fiat currency. We have no protective tariffs. We have free trade everywhere, which is a British maxim and a Jesuit maxim for the creation of world government.
But hold on, free trade's a good thing, I hear.
Yeah, right. Free trade is a poison to any nation wanting to maintain national sovereignty.
Why is that, though?
Well, because, let's say, for example, let's take a manufacturer of shoes. That manufacturer has to pay its employees a certain amount of money. Those employees then produce the shoes. The shoes then are put out into circulation for the customers to buy. You have a foreign manufacturer that, say, produces the very same kinds of shoes, but those people in Mexico or Argentina or Paraguay are working for 10 cents an hour. And those goods that are produced for 10 cents an hour, the merchants can then put a markup on it, but they can bring them into the country and undercut the merchants of the United States by putting these goods in circulation that will absolutely be bought first by the consumer because the consumer is king. When that happens, the domestic manufacturers die. So in order to protect the domestic manufacturer, it is the responsibility of the federal government, and the government has been created to do one of these things, to impose excise duties and imposts, according to the Constitution. When they lay a duty or protective tariff on these goods coming in, let's say the American pair of shoes costs $20 for the consumer to buy, but the foreign pair of shoes costs $10 for the American consumer to buy when everything's said and done. You put a $10 tariff on every pair of shoes coming in. So now you bring it to parity. Now you're protecting your domestic manufacturers, and if the foreign goods don't like it, they don't have to trade with us. That's how you maintain the national sovereignty of your infrastructure. We have two wild cards here that's a problem. The first wild card is worthless money. We have, when a merchant engages in contract for a price to produce goods, that contract can't be kept in stone because the currency is constantly fluctuating. So he has to have something in the contract that he can raise his price because we have worthless fiat money. We need gold and silver coin and currency that's redeemable and such. That enables a merchant to engage in contract, which is a stable contract that will not change throughout the job. The next thing we have is we have unions. Unions are a crime. Unions are socialism. They were started by socialists, anarchists, and communists. And the unions are all governed and controlled by the Roman hierarchy. I don't care which one you call it, the Teamsters, the Mechanics Union that I used to be in, you name it, they're all controlled ultimately by the Roman hierarchy. You cannot have unions in a country where you're going to have true free enterprise without corporate monopolies. If you have corporate monopolies, you're driven to unions.
Right.
But because we did not have corporate monopolies, and if you read Samuel Morse's work, Foreign Conspiracy Against the Liberties of the United States, he said we don't have any corporate monopolies. And if we don't have that, we have true competition between businessmen to make a better product for a cheaper price. And in that context, you have protective tariffs, because we don't want the Jesuits in their huge commercial activity that they had even back then to have their Chinese coolies produce a good and bring it in here for next to nothing to wreck our domestic manufacture. They used England for that for a long time. That's how they wrecked Turkey, and that's how they wrecked India. India and Turkey were not allowed to have productive manufacturers. They had to bring in all their cotton and the things that they produced into England. England spun it into goods and textiles and then would sell it back to those countries. And that's how you keep a nation servile. You wreck its infrastructure and its domestic manufacturers.
I would argue with you, and it's chronicled in Bella Dodd's School of Darkness, that, you know, unions, yeah, they did have a socialistic element to it. There's no two ways about it. But there was also Dickensian worker exploitation. There might have been a balance.
You only have Keynesian exploitation when you have corporate monopolies. When you do not have corporate monopolies, you do not have an exploitation, because the worker can say, forget you. I'm going to go work over here.
Exactly.
You'll pay me more money. It's just like my son. He worked for Honda. Honda would not take care of him. And he's an engineer. He said, Dad, there should be hundreds of places I can go to work in this country. There's only 3 or 4 manufacturers I can work at. So when we have corporate monopolies, we have unions. 2 evils, and the corporate monopolies make tremendous profits because they're a monopoly, and the unions make tremendous profits, and the Vatican benefits from both sides.
A couple of quick points. One, I had said Dickensian, as in Charles Dickens. I didn't mean Keynesian, which, of course, that's another whole state-run situation. So, excuse me.
Keynesian economics.
Right.
Okay.
And also, you know, you're correct. If there were a free flow, you could go and offer your wares anywhere you want to. And I think we have seen a very quiet monopolization and conglomeration of businesses, you know, even though that wasn't supposed to happen, you know, quietly. Have you not, and let me ask you this, not knowing how you're going to react, but, you know, there was the breakup of Standard Oil, but have you not noticed, Eric, that all of a sudden, like, all these companies are amalgamating again?
That was a token breakup.
Of course.
It was token under Theodore Roosevelt. McKinley was truly against these monopolies. McKinley was a real man of God. He was a Methodist. His favorite song is Nearer My God to Thee. He was honest in seeking to begin to break up corporate monopolies, for which reason, one of the reasons they assassinated him. Who takes over but Theodore Roosevelt? Theodore Roosevelt, the governor of New York, that high-level Mason in the back pocket of the Jesuits of New York, W.R. Grayson Company, Knights of Malta. In fact, he has his ranch out there called the Maltese Ranch out in North or South Dakota, named after the Knights. So Roosevelt was supposedly a big trust buster, but that was all a facade. You have the great building of the trusts and monopolies during the Roosevelt era.
I tell you what, let's see. I'm going to jump by Lincoln, but go back because Lincoln is so well known. But since you segued into the situation with Roosevelt, isn't it interesting, and I think we've talked about this, and I've tried to bring this up, that a very anonymous, somewhat character by the name of Philander Knox, who was Taft's Secretary of State, would be such a pivotal figure, first of all, in undoing all the supposed trust busting that Teddy was doing, because Knox was the lawyer for the robber barons. Are you okay with that?
Absolutely. He was CFR, later CFR.
And, of course...
Like Elihu Root.
Yes. And so Knox does this undoing of what Teddy's supposed to be doing. And, of course, he's the character and the transitional figure between Taft and Wilson, who goes ahead and just says, okay, what was it, the 13th Amendment is passed, see you later?
Pardon me?
Well, all right, I get mixed up between the Federal Reserve Act and the income tax.
That's the 16th Amendment.
All right, 16th. I'm thinking of 1913. I do this all the time,
right.
and in another 20 years I'll still be doing this. Okay, so Knox, for the 16th Amendment, says, by the way, it's ratified, see you later. Are we agreed on that?
Declared it ratified.
Yeah, it never was.
Right.
He rammed it through.
Right, and let me give you a little bit previous to that. There was a great war in McKinley's cabinet about the protective tariff. McKinley was a high protective tariff man. After he had his McKinley Act of 1890, they came around again with another act lowering the tariff. Well, then there was another act after that raising the act lowered the tariff was 1895, and it began the personal income tax, which later was adjudicated by the Supreme Court in Pollock versus Farmers Loan and Trust, 1895, which declared that the income tax of that statute was unconstitutional because it was direct and it was uniform. And all direct taxes have to be apportioned. So the Jesuits said, okay, we'll we'll remedy that. We'll just pass the 16th Amendment. We're going to have a direct tax, and it will be uniform. So that's when they started to put upon us, at least after the Lincoln days, the heavy progressive income tax, but the Supreme Court overruled it. The very man that was involved in that act of reducing the tariff and being involved in putting the income tax on the people was Nelson Aldrich.
Ooh.
Nelson Aldrich was later used in the 1909 Tariff Act to introduce that, which lowered the tariff, and it's the same Nelson Aldrich that was used to introduce the Federal Reserve Act,
That's right.
which ultimately gave us that wicked Federal Reserve Bank.
And whose seed?
He's tied to the Rockefellers.
Yeah, that's it, right?
And thus he's tied to the Jesuit order.
That's right. The Nelson and Aldrich is Nelson Rockefeller as well.
Nelson Aldrich was the one whom Nelson Aldrich Rockefeller was named after.
Okay. That's right.
So they're tied to the family, and of course the Rockefellers are nothing more than Jesuit temple coadjutors. They're Illuminatus of the Rockefeller Lodge in New York City, which was once the Columbian Lodge of New York City.